guys, it's Emily, and today I'm here to bring you some thoughts about a book that I recently read, which is Introverts in the Church, Finding Our Place in an Extroverted World by Adam S. McHugh. And this is a book that's been on my TBR since 2014, and I've owned it since 2014, so it's been, languishing on my TBR for a long time. And I became aware of this book on the Modern Mrs. Darcy blog, which was my number one source for books prior to starting BookTube in 2015. And Adam S. McHugh is a minister in a Presbyterian church, but he is also an introvert, and he has discovered throughout his time, being a pastor and a churchgoer, that it is kind of hard for introverts in the modern day church because there's an emphasis on, being outgoing and being, active in all the activities and, knowing everybody in the church. And so he decided he was going to write this book to address some of those issues. This book does come from the topic of being an introvert from an evangelical perspective, so it might not be as useful for you if you're in a mainline denomination like myself. I was a little disappointed that it focused so heavily on evangelical churches. Particularly, it seems to be focusing on like contemporary based worship churches that have an evangelical slant, so it's a lot different than the church I attend. I am a lifelong Methodist, and I currently attend a Methodist church that's pretty close to my house. I can walk to church, and actually the reason I picked this up is because I've been thinking about whether this church is the right church for me. I've been going there ever since I moved to this town over a year ago, and I have never really felt like I really belong there. I am in a Sunday school class, and I do go to church weekly, but I've never felt like I've really made any deep connections there, and the community has sort of been lacking, and that's partially I admit it's partially because I am an introvert and I have trouble, making small talk and making friends, but it's also because they don't seem to have like that great of a program for people in my life situation. I am a late 20s single woman, and they have what they call their young adult class, but what it is a young adult class that was really full of young adults like 10 years ago, and they just never progressed into any other kind of class. Like, for example, there's a couple in this class that has a freshman in college daughter, and so it's like, is it really a young adult class now? So, but they're a great group of people, and I do enjoy going to the class. I just feel like I'm not really in the same life stage as a lot of the people in the class. And none of this has to do with this book. It's just why I picked this book up is I'm always trying to find some tips about maybe what I could do to make more friends with these people in my Sunday school class, or whether this would help me determine whether I should be going, trying to go to a different church. I did feel like I sort of just went to this church because it was convenient, and it's a denomination that I grew up in. But that doesn't mean I couldn't make a change and go to a different church. But anyway, all that to say, Adam McHugh does address a lot of the things that I feel as an introvert in the church. He talks a lot about how introverts favor quiet in worship, and they favor like deeper thoughts in their worship. So I go to the early service at my church because it is a quieter service, and it's more formal, and they do have time for silent prayer and silent thinking, which I really appreciate. And I recently read a prayer for Owen, Meany, and there was a quote in there that I can't think of how it goes exactly, but he was talking about how he really prefers when there's less people at church because it's easier to connect with God, and I feel like that too. When I go to the later service, I always feel like there's too many people, and like people tend to like talk in church a lot, and they, even when they're not talking, like just hearing them breathe sometimes can be annoying, or they're looking at their phone. So I feel like going to a quieter service is better for me. He also talks a lot about how introverts, because he's coming from it from a perspective as a pastor, a lot of people think that introverts are not good at public speaking, but he talks about how he finds speaking, preaching a sermon to be the easiest part of Sundays, and then it's like the coffee hour afterwards that is hard for him. And I feel like that too. I don't have any problem with public speaking, doing speeches or whatever, but I do struggle again with doing small talk and, coffee hour. And like even in my church, we have passing of the peas, where you get up and you shake hands, and I always, I don't mind doing it, but I'm always ready for it to be over and for them to get back to the, the worship part of the service. So I do think this book is talking about a lot of great things. Again, it does come at it from an evangelical perspective, and it's also heavily focused on leadership aspects. So because again, he's coming from it from being a pastor, but he also talks about, introverts need time to process things. Introverts need quiet at church, and he talks about how it will be harder for introverts to make friends in their churches, but it's also, he does talk about how the church could do more to include introverts, and he also talks about how there's an unrealistic expectation on pastors, especially introvert pastors, because a lot of people think that the pastor should be everything for everyone, which isn't realistic for one person. And so he also talks about how in mega churches it might be easier for introvert pastors because there's so many pastors on staff normally, whereas if you're in a rural community where you're the only pastor, you might struggle a lot more because people need a lot more assistance in that regard in a rural setting and a small church setting. He also talks about how introverts think deeper about religious issues, and I have felt that very strongly. I have always had issues with the church, both because I have had trouble developing a community within a church, but also like in the Methodist church, we don't really talk about like the hard things a lot, or at least I don't think we do. So like for example, one of the things I've always had trouble with is the concept of hell, and in the Methodist church they don't really talk about hell because we prefer to focus more on the concept of grace. But I do think it's harder for me to understand the things that trouble me about the Christian theology when I don't have an adequate place to discuss those issues in church. And even in my new church, there's not as much emphasis on studying the Bible, which I struggle with. But even though we have Bible study, it never seems like it's very in depth. I don't know, it always seems kind of like it's superficial in a way. So I do struggle with that. I wish there was more of an emphasis on we're going to talk about the hard things and we're going to have in-depth discussions. And I recently read another book called The Class Meeting by Kevin M. Watson, and he was talking about the Wesleyan concept of class meetings. When the Methodist Church started out, they met in small groups, and he's talking about, in that book they were talking about how he feels like a return to the class meeting would really help the Methodist Church. And I actually think it would be really good for introverts as well, because it would make you feel like you're more included in the church, and you would feel like you had more time to talk about deeper issues and things that might be problematic in our theology. So I really enjoyed this book. There was some issues with it, of course, as I've mentioned, but on the whole, I got a lot out of it. I don't know if it completely helped me figure out my issues, though. I do think I would benefit from possibly going to other churches and maybe trying other things out. I just think this was a good starting point, though, for possibly reading more books about introverts, and he did list some sources in the back that I'm interested in checking out. I have read Quiet by Susan Cain before, and I actually if this is referenced in that book too. So, I have been interested in reading more about introverts in society and introvert cultures, but I don't know what my next steps are though, because I feel like a lot of my issues with the church in general aren't gonna ever go away unless there's like a complete culture shift in the church, which I don't think is gonna happen anytime soon. It might, but you never know. But I don't know. I just wanted to read this to see if it would help me determine what I should do. I am getting more involved in my church. I started going to a book club with some ladies from my church, but again, I think it's partially because I'm on a different life cycle than they are. Most of the ladies are married and most of them have kids, but I still think I could develop friendships with these ladies, but it takes time and it takes effort, and I'm not one where I'm gonna like immediately become friends with somebody. So I don't know. I appreciated this book, and I am going to keep it and refer to it and possibly reread it sometime in the future. If you're an introvert and you go to church, let me know. Or if you don't go to church and you have ideas on how I could get more involved, or if you have a different denomination of a church that you think might be more appealing to an introvert, let me know. I'd love to know all the tips. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope everybody's having a great day and you're reading some great books. And I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!